Today, Mercedes unveiled the W15, the final car that Lewis Hamilton will drive in his Mercedes partnership. And within it, there is one particular area that's going to have the teams up and down the grid paying close attention to, and will even probably lodge a protest over its legality. Now, what area of the W15 can this part be found? Well, it's on the front ring, and they're doing a lot with the front ring, but there's one particular aspect of it that is very much not within this current set of rule regulations that Mercedes have now gone to extreme lengths of trying to make legal. And the thing that Mercedes are trying to reintroduce, which the FIA tried to remove with this new set of technical regulations, is that of the Y250 vortex. And for that to happen, Mercedes has done some very interesting things on the fourth element of their front ring. And amazingly, on the actual real launch car, it seems the fourth element of the front ring does not appear to be mounted onto the side of the nose cone in the traditional manner. And what they're trying to achieve is extremely interesting. It appears Mercedes are trying to achieve with their front ring the rebirth of the inboard vortex known as the Y250. Now, for legality purposes, the team have attached this fourth element by way of a legality wire. This would be huge for the team if they can achieve this and it's passed through the FIA scrutineering. But I think some of you may be asking, well, what is the Y250 vortex? Let me explain this to you. Basically, in the previous eras of Formula 1 with the front ring, you could also generate an inboard wash as well as the outwash. And this was known as the Y250 vortex. And when generated, it influenced the airflow characteristics downstream of the front ring, as seen in the image above. This improved the efficiency of the underbody, which in this current case would of course be the floor, which is the most important, but it also helped the cooling systems and rear ring. Before we move any further with the video, if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing to the Racing Edge, as I'll be covering all 3 days of pre-season testing this year, and of course all of the Grand Prix. Right, back to the video. So Mercedes, if they've managed to accomplish what they set out to do, which I'm sure they have done, they will now be able to help guide an additional flow of air around the front ring end plate into a direction of their choosing, which will obviously be towards the side pods. This will of course increase the flow rate of the air now that is traveling along the side pod, and this will help to power the diffuser even more. Now, of course, this isn't the be-all and end-all that's going to make Mercedes an amazing car again. It's far from it. Everything else has to be designed around this. And I think with what they've done with the front suspension and rear suspension is the second aspect which is going to help them climb up the grid. And for that, they had to introduce an anti-dive system on their car, which is something they did not have on the W13 or 14. To briefly summarize what the anti-dive layout suspension is all about, it's all to do with the transfer of load from the rear end to the front of the car while under braking. Something that Red Bull have once again been far and away the front runners in this area of development since the start of the ground effect era. So, to keep the explanation short of what Mercedes want to achieve, essentially, they want to minimize the lift at the rear of the car while under braking, so they can keep the floor of the W15 as low to the ground as possible. When braking, the change in pitch shifts the application point of the downforce forwards. The front ring gets closer to the ground, producing more downforce. This is evident on the onboard camera shots that we get of the front ring from race weekends. The floor/diffuser lifts, potentially reducing its downforce, and as a consequence, the car might become unstable during braking. The car then enters the next phase of the braking, which is the driver is now entering the corner and the static pitch angle restricts. The car's rear tyres are again pushed more towards the ground than the front, causing understeer and slow turning, the exact opposite of what we want. And this is where Red Bull's anti-dive system comes into play. Essentially, at the front with their new suspension, the inclination of the wrist bones is peculiar as their extension intersects just below the center of mass. This way, only a part of the load transfer produces pitch. Thus, the car remains flat under braking. They've retained the push rod layout from last season, but have now incorporated anti-dive fully within its design. This is something Red Bull have pioneered throughout the ground effect era of F1, and Mercedes are now finally playing catch up. But you have to do this in two sections. One is with the front suspension, while you also have to incorporate the design into the rear suspension. Another major revision that the W15 has undertaken is the rear suspension layout, with the team moving from a pull rod to push rod design. This change from a pull to push rod layout is primarily for aero and packaging reasons and is dependent on the overall car's philosophy. This layout change requires a massive redesign for the entire rear end of the car. This will include a redesign of the gearbox housing and insides, as the rear suspension is mounted directly on the gearbox housing. For 2022 and 2023, Mercedes' gearbox was of course built around the zero pod design, and so for 2024 there's going to have to be a complete redesign of every component housed within it. The Mercedes gearbox obviously for those 2 years had a pull rod suspension layout and an inboard suspension such as a torsion bar, which is the yellow dotted line built in the middle. These inboard suspension parts are built in behind the gear cassette, which is highlighted with a red circle, and the fairing of the drive shaft is slanted and thick. This is a change that all Mercedes power teams will receive for 2024, with the factory outfit making this change on their W15 to help their anti-dive suspension layout, which they are rumoured to have developed. So, in closing, if Mercedes actually could reintroduce the Vortex Y250, this would be an impressive as well as amazing coupe for the team and should help increase the downforce by a considerable margin, I would presume.